In the UK, companies now have to report their gender pay gap every year. The latest figures have just been released. According to the BBC, fewer than half the firms have narrowed the pay gap this year, and as you might expect, this is being reported as a big problem. The TUC said companies should be forced to explain how they'll close the gap. But do the statistics mean what people think they mean? And are we making a huge blunder by getting our facts wrong? Let's discuss. My name is Mallen Baker, and this is the Mallen Baker Show for Changemakers. For years, I've talked about the potential for unintended consequences when companies try to do the right thing but get it wrong. An example I often give is that of the London Underground. Some years ago, the Underground was under political attack because of late-running trains. And at around the same time, because I used to use it a lot in those days, I and many other people began to notice a growing tendency during rush hour that trains would shut their doors before all the people had gotten on the train. It became so bad that it really fueled rude behaviour on the part of Londoners who had gotten used to the idea that if they didn't shove their way on pretty quickly, the doors were going to be closed on them. Clearly, the drivers were being incentivised to keep the trains running on time. However, they weren't being incentivised to make sure that passengers were on the damn trains. So a measure that was designed to tackle a real problem, late-running trains, turned into a perverse incentive. And it happens all the time in corporate life and in government policy because these are big institutions trying to create systems for large numbers of people. And it's why you have to put in the work to get the details right. I'm reminded of that now as we survey the situation with the gender pay gap. The aim is absolutely one we should be signing up to, moving the workplace to a position of genuine equal opportunities for all at all levels of the organisation. And let's just agree that we're signed up to that as an aim, just like we're signed up to having the trains run on time. The question is whether the policy to name and shame over the gender pay gap is the policy to achieve that, or is it the equivalent of leaving the passengers on the platform? First of all, what is the gender pay gap? It's a very simple measure. Take all the jobs done by men, add up the total salary paid to them all, divide by the number of male employees. Take the number of jobs done by women, add up the total salary paid to them all, divide by the number of female employees. Compare the two numbers, that's your pay gap. Simple as that. When we talk about it, it's conflated with equal pay for equal work. But it's not a measure of that at all, because all jobs are averaged out. It's already illegal in the UK to pay people differently for exactly the same job at exactly the same level. No, this is different. In theory, you get to a zero pay gap by having perfectly equal outcome. Exactly equal numbers of men and women at all levels of the business. But in the world of free choice, we don't get that at all. There are a number of jobs that predominantly men choose to do. There are a number of jobs that predominantly women choose to do. Individual exceptions to all of those generalisations, of course. But the question then becomes, which do you value more? Equality of outcome or freedom of choice? I remember doing a review once of the diversity profile for the workforce of a major water company in the UK. The company had broadly equal numbers of men and women through the company. It would today, however, have a significant gender pay gap. Why? The bulk of women who were employed were in the company's call centre, lower paid jobs. The bulk of the men were working in the sewage works or digging roads and laying pipes. Outdoors work in unpleasant circumstances tends to be higher paid because if it wasn't, nobody would choose to do it. Now, there's no easy answer to that situation, and it's by no means even obvious that it requires an answer, unless you're going to require that there are equal numbers of women working on the sewage farms and digging the roads and equal numbers of men in the call centres. You can encourage women to see those careers as being perfectly good options, of course, but you can't force people to take jobs that they don't want. And surely we don't want a world where we force people to take jobs on that basis, do we? Now, of course, there are some good measures that employers can take that promote equal opportunities in the workplace, removing discrimination, encouraging and mentoring women as they take more senior positions, and all of that. But there are many other measures that we tell employers they should do that actually make the situation worse if you think that the gender pay gap is a thing. For instance, we tell responsible employers they should offer flexible working to women, especially useful when they become parents. Now, that's a good policy, but it inevitably makes your gender pay gap worse because the crude figure makes no distinction between full and part-time workers, which is one of the reasons why it's bonkers. It doesn't compare like with like. We tell responsible employers they should be looking to take on new female graduates, especially in certain desirable industries like the STEM fields. But taking on new female graduates will make your pay gap worse because you're taking on women at the lowest pay rate. And that's the point. This measure creates perverse incentives. If I'm an employer with a negative pay gap and I'm being named and shamed and told to reduce that gap, it encourages me to do the following three things. 1, avoid taking on any women who say they might be having children anytime soon, and if existing staff do, find a way to let go of them before they come back from maternity. Now, those, of course, are not legal and not ethical. But women having children is a factor in the pay gap. Childless women tend to earn more than childless men. It's only once they've started a family that changes. 2, don't offer flexible working, since that will make your pay gap worse. 3, don't hire female starter-level employees. Only hire more experienced women and starter-level men. Now, not all of the incentives are perverse, of course. You also benefit by promoting women into senior positions, but on its own, that won't outweigh the other stuff. And even that's not as straightforward a thing to do as people assume. Now, hopefully, most responsible companies would resist those perverse incentives, but in so doing, they commit to getting held up every year as being somehow in the wrong. Does that strike you as an effective way to change the world? In his book, Why Men Earn More, Warren Farrell reviewed the data and identified 25 factors that predict a higher salary at work. Without going through the whole list, basically, jobs that contain higher risk, longer or unsociable hours, uncomfortable working conditions, years of uninterrupted service, higher requirements for travel or even to relocate, higher levels of training. Certain sectors, such as medical doctors, airline pilots and the like, all of those are predictors of higher levels of pay. As things stand today, with men and women making more or less free choices about what they do, men are more likely to choose jobs with higher salary factors attached. They will be the ones choosing to work in the mines, work on building sites, unsociable hours and all the rest of it. Even in Scandinavia, which is considered to be home to the most egalitarian systems in the world, the difference between men and women in terms of the jobs they freely choose to do is just as wide as anywhere else. In fact, the evidence suggests even wider. So these are the questions. 1, do we believe that companies should be expected to pay people on the basis of the contribution they make to the success of the company? 2, do we believe that people should be free to choose what they do, at least as long as they're being realistic about what their skills enable them to do? I mean, I'd love to be an elite tennis player, for instance, but, you know. And 3, do we believe that people should be free to have children when they want, and that couples should be free to decide for themselves how they divide up the earning versus the childcare responsibilities? If we agree with all of the above, it seems to me that you inherently accept that you get an unequal outcome. And that's only a problem if you see pay rates as the only relevant measure of quality of life that affects people. Now, of course, the thing that becomes more complicated in this situation is identifying whether you have discrimination in your company, holding women or others back for absolutely the wrong reason. You won't be able to just look at a very simple statistic and be definitively told the answer to that important question. So you'll have to do a lot more work on it instead. Some companies, like Buffer, for instance, practice radical transparency on people's pay to get over questions about unfairness. They publish a formula for how salaries will be calculated and stick to that, and then just so everybody knows for sure, they publish everyone's salary to the world. Buffer's formula includes a cost of living multiplier for different locations, a role multiplier so individuals can see salary progression within their role, and an experience factor. And if that sounds slightly complicated, well, yes, it's their third iteration, and they discovered on the journey that, surprise, surprise, simple formulas don't tend to work within real-life situations with real people. And by the way, Buffer, with its transparent merit-based formula, would almost certainly not be posting a zero gender pay gap under the UK system. So in conclusion, the UK publication of incredibly crude pay gap figures is an unhelpful device to encourage greater equal opportunities in the workplace. We certainly want good companies to do work on ensuring that they improve fair recognition to their employees for the work that they do, but this blunderbuss device makes it harder to do that by naming and shaming companies and pushing them to do things that might be counterintuitively bad practice, and in particular bad for the women who work for them.